Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. Thanks for joining our Modern Workplace Transformation with Microsoft 365 webinar. Before we start, we'd like to go over some housekeeping notes. We do enjoy hearing questions, so please use the question icon to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to answer them during the session. Additionally, we will have some poll questions throughout the session, so please feel free to respond as you see this open in the poll section. With that in mind, I will pass this over to Josh Starbucks, our solution architect for Microsoft 365 Productivity Team.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Tarbox. I'm a Microsoft 365 Productivity Solutions Architect for Rackspace. I want to welcome you to the first episode of our webinar series, Modern Workplace Transformation with Microsoft 365. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about embarking on your journey to Microsoft Cloud, which you've likely already undertaken in some capacity, but also how to progress to add additional workloads, and hopefully show you some pretty cool things that Rackspace technology can help you achieve along the way. Now, on the agenda for today's episode, we'll be talking about Microsoft Modern Workplace, what it is and what it means for you, the transition process from legacy workplace to modern workplace, and understanding your readiness as you plan for a modern workplace transformation. Now, as a solutions architect, I'm responsible for understanding customers' objectives and initiatives and developing solutions tailored for their business needs. But while doing so, I also like to be aware of their pain points to better understand what problems I'm trying to solve for. Now, common pain points that I commonly hear from customers are, I want to reduce the number of servers in my data center, or I want to move my business to the cloud as much as I can. And while that can be a destination for many organizations, getting there can seem a little overwhelming if you aren't sure where to start. It's also important to know that cloud transformation is not a one-size-fits-all for every organization. So proper planning and road mapping is critical. So let's talk about what a typical on-premise model looks like. Historically, organizations have maintained and supported the following technologies. We started with an identity provider. Now, far and away, the most prevalent is Microsoft Active Directory. This is the home for managing your users, their groups, and their devices, but also contact information for partnerships that you may work with. We have an internal messaging server. Primarily, Microsoft Exchange allowed your users to communicate with each other, your customers, and your vendors. We had file servers, sometimes one, sometimes many. Sometimes they were located in different locations, maybe utilizing DFS for replication. Now, these stored your users' personal files in home directories and also department or shared files. We had a phone system, and it may be integrated with Active Directory, and it may be integrated with Microsoft Exchange to offer unified communications. Many organizations also implemented an instant messaging platform, such as Microsoft Link Server or Cisco Jabber, that provided real-time communication and presence to your users as they collaborated with each other. But perhaps it didn't allow you to chat with users external to your organization. And maybe you also had an internal IIS or WordPress web application server, or you leveraged Microsoft SharePoint Server to provide a company intranet or communication hub to share company information, such as HR benefits, job postings, or a company directory. You maybe had a virtual desktop infrastructure like remote desktop services, Citrix, or VMware Horizon that provided virtual desktops or streaming applications to your users. And because you had Active Directory, your devices were joined to a domain, and you managed them via group policies, or maybe had a tool like System Center Configuration Manager to provide advanced device management and imaging capabilities for workstations. But you also likely had a separate solution like AirWatch or MOS 360 just to manage your mobile devices to allow them to connect to corporate email or allow you to remotely wipe devices due to termination or maybe even stolen devices. And you likely had a web conferencing tool like Cisco WebEx or GoToMeeting or Zoom to host meetings between internal users and external partners. And to protect against threats, you acquired an endpoint protection platform such as Trend Micro, Symantec, or maybe even utilized the native Windows Defender. And finally, you had an email protection platform that provided email security from threats like malicious attachments and phishing attempts. And as you can see, what you were left with was managing many different systems from many different vendors, each with their own support costs and with little or no integration between them. Now, this type of model may have worked well for your on premise users. Along the way, you also needed to provide access to your users to allow them to reach corporate resources from outside of the office. And so you spun up a VPN gateway, perhaps a radius server to allow them to authenticate and connect to those internal resources securely from outside the corporate boundaries. That VPN solution, it likely resulted in inconsistent experiences for your users. Maybe sometimes users' passwords on their workstations, they didn't match their Active Directory passwords. Sometimes group policies maybe failed to run on machines because the VPN tunnel didn't establish in time. And perhaps your phone system didn't provide a soft phone version, which resulted in sales not having access to their corporate phone number or voicemails when they were on the road for days or weeks at a time. And over time, you had to deal with patching systems, upgrading servers or applications. Sometimes it went smoothly, sometimes it didn't. New operating systems were released that had a bunch of cool new features, but you weren't quite sure how you could take advantage of them or even manage them centrally. And sometimes other projects arose that had a higher priority and system upgrades took a back seat. And sometimes pandemics occurred that changed your entire business model. But ultimately, you were left supporting aging infrastructure, storage array networks that were running out of space, and inherited configurations that you weren't quite sure what they did, but everything worked well enough so you didn't feel a need to change what wasn't broken. And meanwhile, your workforce was becoming more decentralized by the day. And then you heard about Exchange Online. And because you were already familiar with accessing personal email from the public cloud, say via Gmail, Hotmail, or Yahoo, and because Exchange servers were complicated and expensive to set up, maintain, and upgrade, it became very enticing to move your corporate email to the cloud. And so you began your cloud journey there. Now, if all this sounds familiar, rest assured that you are not alone. This has been a common path that many organizations have undertaken in their cloud transformations. Email has widely been the gateway to dipping the corporate toes into the cloud. However, many organizations stop after moving their email, but it doesn't need to. There are solutions for all the aforementioned infrastructure with Microsoft 365, and we're going to dive into what that looks like. But before we do that, let's take a minute to take a look at our first poll question for the audience. What is your company's stance on moving on-premise workloads to the cloud? I'll give you a minute or two to complete this before we move on. All right, we'll give you another 30 seconds or so to finish up that poll question. All right, let's go ahead and continue. Now, to combat the mess of disparate internal systems and support that largely didn't have seamless integration between them, the idea for modern Microsoft Modern Workplace was born. Microsoft Modern Workplace isn't necessarily the idea that everyone now works from a home office, though Modern Workplace does enable employees to efficiently access the tools required to perform their job from any location. Rather, think of Microsoft Modern Workplace as the enablement of the cloud based services that can replace many of your legacy on premise solutions by using the entire range of Microsoft 365 products. Now, when moving to Microsoft Modern Workplace, it will generally result in a reduction of infrastructure, consolidation of products and vendors. We have quicker frequency of new feature releases, easier administration. We have data resiliency and reduced downtime. We have better native security capabilities and also better collaboration capabilities as well. And also, because your data is now in the cloud, you have better access to that data as well. So Microsoft Modern Workplace consolidates many of the existing legacy workplace solutions that you may be using today. Azure Active Directory provides the identity and access management in the Microsoft Modern Workplace. Users, groups, devices, just as you are familiar with Active Directory, are managed in Azure Active Directory in a similar manner. Exchange Online is the messaging platform in Modern Workplace with a similar look and feel from its legacy workplace counterpart, but with more features and much better security. SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business provide data storage capabilities in Modern Workplace. SharePoint Online for your company's shared department files, and OneDrive for Business for your users' personal or home directory files. SharePoint Online can also provide your company's intranet, offering a central hub of communication for your organization and specific team sites for all your department or business units as well. And Teams provides instant messaging and presence capabilities, as well as more, such as teams and channels. Teams are groups that bring users together to collaborate on similar topics, such as a project, or for users within the same business unit or department, whereas channels represent more specific collaboration topics within the same team. So, for example, all of your users from your IT department will be part of the IT team, and individual projects, such as migration planning to SharePoint Online, would represent a channel within that team. And it can contain all the members of IT or be restricted to only the users that need to be part of that conversation. Teams also includes web conferencing capabilities, so between users within the organization or with users outside of the organization as well. Now, Teams can also provide telephony capabilities with Teams Phone, either with an integrated calling plan with shared minutes amongst your users or with a bring your own dialing plan capabilities as well. Workstation management and mobile device management are both handled within Tune. Now, this includes support for all your devices, Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android, all from a single management portal. One really great thing about Intune is that it can support both corporate devices with enrollment and personal devices without requiring enrollment. Windows 365 provides virtual desktops for your users, which allows you to provide a consistent managed Windows experience to your users without providing a physical machine, perhaps for instances where you need to quickly deploy machines to seasonal employees. Windows 365 devices can support cloud-only networking for users that really just need access to Microsoft 365 services and the internet, or it can be integrated with your internal corporate network via Azure VNet support, which would provide access to internal corporate resources as well. Devices in Windows 365 are also managed within Tune, allowing you to deploy policies and applications to them just as if they were physical devices. Endpoint protection is provided with Defender for Endpoint. This provides next-gen anti-malware protection, endpoint detection and response capabilities, and insight on security vulnerabilities that may exist within your managed device's OS settings or the third-party applications installed on them. And messaging security is provided by Defender for Office 365, which provides enhanced safeguarding against malicious threats posed by emails, links, and attachments. Defender for Office 365 also provides additional security to other Microsoft Modern Workplace services such as Teams, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive for Business. This multi-platform capability with Defender for Office 365 really sets it apart from other solutions on the market. And with that, let's take a look at our next poll question. Which workloads do you have interest in moving next to Microsoft Modern Workplace? We'll give you a minute or two to complete this poll. All right, we'll give you another 30 seconds or so to complete this poll. All right, great. So let's move forward. All right, so what might a typical Microsoft 365 modern workplace transformation look like? Now, as mentioned earlier, email is far and away the most popular workload that organizations choose to move to the cloud, coupled with the fact that internal Exchange servers are complex to set up and maintain, they're vulnerable to exploits, and that many people are familiar with cloud based personal email. The idea of moving corporate email to the cloud becomes very easy to entertain. However, it's important to remember that developing a plan for identity should come along anytime you look to transition a workload to Microsoft 365. Many organizations don't properly plan for identity management and end up having to support different credentials for their on premise and cloud workloads. And sometimes it ends up being many different credentials if the organization is using web based solutions from other vendors, like Zoom or your CRM solution. And since you've spent years building out users, groups, and memberships and permissions based on those groups, I'm sure it can feel a little daunting to think about having to do it all over again. Fortunately, you won't need to. By implementing Azure Active Directory Connect, you can bridge that gap between your on premise Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. It can synchronize all your users and groups and devices and also users' passwords. So users won't need to remember separate credentials for logging into their machine or to their applications, which you know will only lead to users forgetting their passwords or writing them down and inundating your help desk with tickets trying to get logged in. And if you've already moved your email to Exchange Online but didn't implement directory synchronization from the start, well, that's okay. It can easily be retrofitted and added after the fact. If you may be asking yourself, why would I want to do this? And aside from the same sign on experience that I mentioned earlier, directory synchronization is going to open up additional capabilities for future cloud adoption, specifically as it relates to device management, modern file management, and permission migrations. Directory synchronization enables hybrid identity. This means that the same identities exist both on premise in Active Directory and in Azure Active Directory, and they're linked together. Now, this allows Azure AD joined devices to access on premise resources like applications, file shares, and printers without needing to perform additional authentication, just as though they were domain joined devices. In essence, hybrid identity will allow for better coexistence while you are undertaking your transformation to Microsoft Modern Workplace at whatever speed you're ready to move at. And so now that we have your identities, your devices, and your mail situated in Microsoft 365, where do we go from here? Well, there's a couple different options based on your organization's needs or dependencies. But there's one answer that is obvious: any workloads that don't have a migration effort associated with it. Instant messaging and third party web conferencing solutions can easily be transitioned to Microsoft Teams, which allows you to begin adopting that platform for interorganizational and external communication and web conferencing very quickly. When you use Microsoft Teams, teams and channels that you create get an accompanying site created in SharePoint Online. which then allows you to start collaborating and sharing files with other team members very easily. All the files that get sent through Teams are stored in the Teams SharePoint online site. And remember that since Teams can also has the ability to take on your organization's telephony needs, you can begin to look at adopting it as your phone system platform as well, which will then allow streamlined communication and collaboration from one application, whether you're in the office or away from it. Teams Phone can be purchased again as an all-in-one solution with integrated calling plans, or if you prefer, you can integrate it into third-party dialing plans using direct routing. And while we're on the subject of adopting Teams with its integrations with SharePoint Online, it's also a good time to consider transitioning your existing on-premise files to SharePoint Online as well. Now, this would consist of migrating the data on your file servers, both shared departmental data to SharePoint Online and individuals' home directories to OneDrive for Business. And if you're asking yourself, well, why would I want to do this? Well, there's a few reasons that immediately come to mind here. One, it allows you to turn down a server or servers that are consuming a large amount of data and resources in your data center. You may have file servers in a central location, but you may also have file servers in remote sites, remote closets, or even on remote desks that are lacking proper security controls. It allows you to down a dependency from your internal infrastructure, resulting in less operating, support, and licensing costs. The collaboration capabilities in SharePoint Online that simply just do not exist in a file server. When Office documents are in SharePoint Online, it allows for multiple users to collaborate simultaneously on files in real time. You're likely familiar with sending Office documents back and forth through email where edits are made independently and they need to be merged after the fact. You probably found yourself asking if you were even working on the most recent copy of a document, or the pain of having to download a document from a file server, make edits, and then re upload the document. Well, with SharePoint Online, you have one file that everyone is collaborating on, and it can remain online the entire time. It's easy to share files externally with your business partners and securely. Files are more accessible. If you have access to a browser, you have access to your files. If you're working remotely from a personal PC that doesn't have the corporate VPN client, it's no longer a problem. And when organizations start to use SharePoint Online, Teams, and OneDrive for Business for documents and file storage, you can begin to look at developing it into your central communication hub for the entire company, and also developing communication sites for your various departments. Now, another logical step is to transition your on-premise device management to Microsoft 365 with Intune. One enormous dependency on Active Directory is group policy, or the managed settings that you have configured for your users and their devices. Group policy worked great. Well, it worked okay for your on-premise users and devices. Group policies, unfortunately, they don't provide a lot of feedback. Did the policy apply? How do I know that it applied? Which devices did it or did it not apply to? It's not real easy to hunt that information down. And when devices left the network and no longer had line of sight to a domain controller, it was even more of a crapshoot. And applying specific policies to just specific devices required a well-designed Active Directory organizational unit structure or caused you to need to move devices around in Active Directory, potentially breaking links with other group policies, which is why there was a reason why tools like System Center Configuration Manager exist, because it could provide better device management capabilities, flexibility, and reporting than group policies could. But Configuration Manager was complicated. And while it was great at managing your Windows devices, it wasn't so great for your other devices. And once again, when devices left the network, there wasn't a whole lot you could do without a VPN connection. Things like internet-based client management or cloud management gateway were options, but these were even more complicated. And before you knew it, you had an additional 5 servers in your data center. Well, by moving to modern device management within Tune, you can consolidate your existing workstation and mobile device management solutions into a single platform that supports all your devices in a single pane of glass. You can manage devices wherever they are, on-prem, at home, in a hotel, even without being connected to the corporate network. It doesn't matter. As long as the device has an internet connection, you have the ability to manage it, including the capability to remotely connect to it as well. And if you are using group policies, Intune allows you to support both Intune policies and group policies concurrently, thereby allowing you to use the group policies you've already created, but begin to create new policies within Intune. Intune also allows you to import your historical group policies to determine the availability of those settings within Intune, allowing you to gracefully transition those to modern management where possible. And if you aren't sure what settings or policies you should implement to better secure your devices, Intune also provides security baselines, which are pre-configured settings that are easy to deploy to a pilot group, test, and finally roll out to the rest of the organization without needing to restructure Active Directory or move devices around. Another big component of modern device management within Intune is Windows Autopilot. Now, I'm going to leave showcasing this for a future webinar episode, but if you aren't familiar with Windows Autopilot or what it can provide for your organization, I have little doubt that you'll be impressed. In essence, you can take a device or purchase a device from a vendor of your choice, can have it sent directly to the user, and have it automatically join to your organization, apply the required settings, install the required applications, all without being touched by a member of IT. And when you use Intune to manage your Windows devices, you can take advantage of a policy known as known folder move, which is a policy that can automatically redirect a user's desktops, documents, and pictures to OneDrive for Business. So you no longer have to worry about users storing files on their desktop and losing them, because now those files are going to be synced to OneDrive automatically, along with the rest of the files that we migrated from their home directories earlier. And if a user needs to have their PC replaced, no worries, because those files can be ready for them right where they were after their new device finishes autopilot, all without ever having to do a thing. Intune can also do some really cool things for mobile devices and supports a BYOD model. You don't necessarily need to manage a device in order to protect your corporate data. You can manage just how the device's applications behave with Microsoft 365 and restrict capabilities and sharing to other applications on the device, all automatically without requiring the user to enroll the device. Now, this should give Karen from accounting some peace of mind knowing that IT won't have the ability to inadvertently delete her personal data, though you can still remove corporate data from her device if the need arises. And now that you have your devices managed by Intune, including the required policies configured and applications packaged and security configurations deployed, you would be in a suitable position to begin transitioning your internal VDI solution to Windows 365, as you will now have the tools and policies in place to better support that solution. Also, since your devices are managed with Intune, you can easily get them onboarded into Defender for Endpoint and perhaps even push an uninstaller to remove your existing endpoint protection platform from your devices. And if you are already using Windows Defender antivirus, Defender for Endpoint will seamlessly integrate with it. So there's nothing to uninstall in that scenario. Now, as part of your transformation journey to Microsoft Modern Workplace, it's important not to forget about security. Far too often, security becomes an afterthought during a transition, when really it should be front of mind anytime you're putting data somewhere publicly accessible. And yes, that even includes Microsoft 365. Now, Microsoft 365 provides several tools to enhance security in your tenant, but at the end of the day, it's up to you to properly implement those controls. Now, one of the most important controls that you can implement is multi-factor authentication. MFA of some version is built into every Microsoft 365 tenant. You can use either the basic per user MFA or you can use security defaults. Both of these options do have their limitations. For example, you need to remember to turn on per user MFA for newly created accounts manually. So unfortunately, it does become a little too easy to have someone fall through the cracks. And both of these free options aren't very flexible, but regardless, it still allows you to enable MFA for your users, which is increasingly important. However, Rackspace's preferred method for implementing MFA comes by use of conditional access. Now, because conditional access is considered more of an advanced feature, it's not available through all Microsoft 365 licensing plans, but it can be added to your existing licensing through an add-on license called Azure Active Directory Premium. Conditional access adds a lot of flexibility for deploying not just MFA, but other security controls as well. One, it allows you to automatically target every user. So even if a new user is created, the conditional access policy will automatically apply to them as well. Two, it allows you to control when MFA is applied. So perhaps you need to create exclusions for one reason or another, or you need to ensure a specific service, such as in-tune enrollment, doesn't apply MFA. And three, it allows you to control how users can connect to Office Microsoft 365. A common scenario that we see is wanting to block Outlook from personal devices so users can't download PSTs onto non-corporate machines. Well, with conditional access, you can achieve this. So ultimately, conditional access provides a lot of security benefits to an organization if implemented properly. Modern authentication. Now, Microsoft uses modern authentication all across Microsoft 365. This provides better security than basic authentication, which is just a username and password sent in clear text. You still use usernames and passwords in Microsoft 365, but modern authentication uses token-based authentication, in which you are authenticating to an identity provider, which would in this case would be Azure Active Directory. And then that provider generates a token for access to other services, such as Exchange Online or SharePoint Online. Modern authentication also allows for things like MFA to occur, which is why it's important to use modern auth whenever you can, but also disable the use of legacy auth where you can as well, which you can do with conditional access. And what about if you're not quite ready to move everything to Microsoft Modern Workplace yet? What if you have internal line of business applications that need to remain on premise for one reason or another? Or you have web based solutions hosted via third party vendors? Well, things like Azure Active Directory Single Sign On allows you to federate third party applications with Azure Active Directory. Now, earlier we talked about transitioning your web conferencing to Teams, but what if you really like WebEx or you prefer Zoom? By all means, you can continue to use them, but you can simplify things for your users while increasing security by federating them with Azure Active Directory. Now, this means that you are redirecting the authentication of other web-based applications your organization uses to point to Microsoft 365, thereby allowing users to remember a single set of credentials rather than one for each various service that they're using, and also take advantage of MFA and conditional access policies that we discussed earlier. Some third-party vendors may already support MFA on their platforms, which is great, but that also means that your users may end up having to use multiple authenticator applications, which is not a great experience for them. Azure App Proxy. Now, this service within Azure AD, I would say, is largely overlooked, but it allows you to securely publish internal web-based applications to the internet without needing to create NAT rules in your firewall, thereby exposing your internal infrastructure to bad actors. When you publish an app through Azure App Proxy, you can again take advantage of the feature sets that we discussed: MFA, conditional access, and modern authentication, even if the internal application doesn't support it natively. So if you have on-premise dependencies that you aren't quite ready to get rid of, you can still modernize and secure the access to them. Now, these last two items, Azure Single Sign-On and Azure App Proxy, are increasingly beneficial if your organization has cyber risk insurance. More and more, these providers are requiring MFA everywhere. So if you have internal systems that are accessible from the internet, or your VPN doesn't require MFA, integrating these services with Azure SSO or Azure App Proxy can help ensure that your organization can remain covered by your provider. It's equally important for you to account for compliance planning as you transform to Microsoft Modern Workplace as well. These features help protect your corporate data and keep you and your customers' sensitive information secure. This includes message and file retention for modern workloads like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Teams, which allows your organization to set policies for how long content needs to be kept and what to do with it when it passes that threshold. Many organizations have requirements that email or chat communications need to be held for 7 years. With retention policies, you can ensure that that data is maintained, even in the event a user deletes it from their mailbox. Once those 7 years are up, you can choose, if you want to leave it there or have it automatically purged from Microsoft 365. Data loss prevention in Microsoft Modern Workplace allows companies to prevent the sending or sharing of sensitive information to users outside of the organization, or even within the same organization. Financial data, credit card numbers, health records, social security numbers, they can all be identified, monitored, and have specific action taken on them, such as blocking them, requiring manager approval, or providing pop-up tips within their Outlook clients to alert your users that they may be sending sensitive data before they actually do. Now, as you prepare to transform your legacy workplace to Microsoft Modern Workplace, it's important to assess your readiness and plan the proper steps. Understand your licensing. If you already have Microsoft 365 licensing, understand what services and features are currently available to you. Most plans include the core components of Microsoft 365, Exchange Online, Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint Online. But not all plans include some of the other technologies that I mentioned, like Intune or conditional access. If you need help in understanding what features are available in your licensing, you can get a nice breakdown by going to m365maps.com, or you can reach out to your Rackspace account executive who can engage our Microsoft 365 productivity team to help you understand your licensing and what features are available to you. And if you're new to Microsoft 365 and Rackspace, or don't already have licensing, or even know where to get started, at the end of this webinar, I'll provide a QR code which will allow you to get in contact with us, and we'll be sure to follow up to get you started. Identify your current pain points. Understanding what you are trying to solve for will help you understand where you need to start. And if you're not sure where to start, we'd love to speak with you to understand your goals and help with your transformation. Understand your security and or compliance requirements. Now, this may require some internal conversations with your security or compliance officer or legal teams to understand what's required. It may also require getting corporate policies defined. And if you have cyber risk insurance, you'll want to understand what those requirements are that allow you to continue coverage. And if you're comfortable sharing where you have gaps, we can make recommendations on where Microsoft Modern Workplace can help. Identify what dependencies exist in your environment. If you have Active Directory, what are its dependencies? Perhaps you have Radius authentication with your Wi-Fi or VPN. Perhaps you're using LDAP with applications in your environment. And if you have domain joined workstations, are they connecting to applications that use workstation authentication? Understand what group policies are, what your group policies are, and maybe what's required. And if you aren't sure what dependencies you may have, Rackspace can provide assessments to help you understand what they are and how you can move forward. Identify your workloads that have an alternative in the cloud. Prioritize them based on your business needs. Attack the lowest hanging fruits first. Plan for controlled rollout of services by enabling or disabling workloads included in your licensing until your organization is ready to use them. Properly create the foundation. Spend time planning the foundational components of your modern workplace before you implement them. This may include developing proper security policies, compliance policies, access policies, governance policies, and sharing policies. It's more difficult to get the cats back into the bag if you've enabled all these services to your users without proper controls in place to protect your corporate data. And if you aren't sure which policies you need or which ones you can use, Rackspace is happy to provide guidance there as well. Adoption and change management. One very, very important but frequently overlooked component in your transition to Microsoft Modern Workplace is being in a position to ensure that your organization is ready to adopt Microsoft Modern Workplace. You are going to be introducing a lot of new tools, functionality, and processes to your users, many of whom have been operating with the same tools and processes for many years. Things may look different depending on what tools you are coming from. SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, they're going to look and feel different than file servers. Teams and channels may feel foreign to users who are accustomed to different platforms. Other users may be resistant to change in their established processes. The seamlessness or fluidity of your first workload migration to Microsoft 365 can really underpin how future cloud adoption will be received by your users. If it's rough and rocky, users are going to carry that mindset with future migrations. By implementing a solid change management program, you can, one, positively affect the speed of adoption, thereby reducing costs through shortened deployment or coexistence periods. Two, you can ensure that your users succeed in sustaining the changes that you're making. Three, you can ensure that your users are more effective with the new tools, features, and processes. And four, you can reduce project risk and increase the probability of success. All right, we'll pause here for a moment and take a look at our last poll question. What is your biggest concern about adopting Microsoft Modern Workplace? We'll give you a minute here to answer this poll. All right, we'll give you about another 30 more seconds to complete the poll question. All right, we'll move forward. So how can Rackspace help you with your modern workplace transformation to Microsoft 365? Rackspace has a dedicated team of Microsoft 365 architects and engineers with expertise in assisting organizations transforming their business with Microsoft Modern Workplace, including providing assessments, advisory services, planning and road mapping, designing, migrations, and implementation services for organizations of any size. We have engagement models including professional services and elastic engineering. So we're able to assist your organization in multiple ways. We also have a dedicated team of Microsoft 365 licensing specialists who are here to help you understand what licensing you currently have and what licensing can help you achieve your modern workplace initiatives. So in closing, I want to thank you for all being here today as we discuss modern workplace transformation with Microsoft 365. Stay tuned for future episodes in this series where we'll dive deeper into the various technologies that we discussed today. If you are interested in learning more about what we discussed today, please scan this QR code to fill out a questionnaire, and we'll be sure to follow up for a discussion. Again, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, and we'll see you next time.